Hey Wolverines, my name is Jared Wilkerson with the UVU Review, and today we've come down to the DX building to check out the UVU Composting Soil program spearheaded by none other than Tyler Hacking. So Tyler, why don't you tell us about it?
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Tyler Hacking. I'm a UVU alumni and I went through a botany degree at UVU, and throughout that time I was able to develop a compost program for the university, which I've been able to build, and I'm really excited to show you today what we do.
So let's check it out.
All right, this is a 27-gallon worm bin, and it's one of our older designs, one of the older models. But as you can see, there's lots of drainage, and that allows for airflow and oxygen to be more present than absent throughout the compost bin. There are lots of holes on the sides as well. We're gonna build and layer this new worm bin. And once it's at full capacity, it can hold up to 100,000 worm population. It'll start with a 5,000 to 10,000 worm population. And right now we're adding in UVU Review newspaper, and we're just creating a little base layer onto which we're gonna put compost from another bin so that we can transfer bacteria and fungi and also worms into the new bin. So I'm going to take that material from another bin here, and it's full of worms, 3 red wiggler species, and this is what we call the mother layer. We want to make sure that this is in here because it provides a happy place for the worms where they will continue to reproduce, and it provides enough of a population for the bin to be able to sustain itself throughout the compost process. Now that we have our mother layer, we'll add some leaves, not too many. We'll add food from dining services and the chefs at UVU. We give them all sorts of different fruits and veggies, lots of pineapple tops sometimes. And with that, we're gonna add sand. Not too much, but the grit of sand allows worms to break down their food more efficiently. And next, we have coffee grounds from Starbucks, which we'll put on top of that. And then we'll usually do another layer of cardboard and a mother layer, and that seals it off, and we feed it once every 2 to 4 weeks for 2 months, and then we harvest it. After a 2 to 3 month process in the bin, we dump the bins into big containers like this, and we bury little worm traps. And what that means is that I put a whole bunch of fruit inside of these containers, and the worms, they go inside of the container and around the container. I've already extracted from this one a couple of times, and so I'm just pulling out the last few generations of worms, but as you can see, they're attracted to the fruit, and that's a great way to maintain our worm populations. And I just put them back into one of the other compost bins. And after a couple of weeks, all of this is pretty worm-free, and then we put it through other filtration processes. Here's what we pulled out of our last container that has been filtered of our worms through our worm traps. Now it's full of all sorts of things that we want to separate, including some big, pumpkin and cucumber seeds. So we're going to pour it into this filter. I built this a couple weeks ago, and it has different screen sizes. We have 3 screen sizes, and we just shake it like this. And what comes out is really fine grain worm castings, vermicompost. And the reason we do this is because it's highly soluble and can dissolve in water, and then we can inject it through the sprinkler systems of the university and distribute it over a much larger area. All right, we're gonna mix up some of our UVU compost soil mixtures for the university. Today we're gonna do potting soil. So right here I have hydrated sphagnum moss, and that's going to be the bulk of our blend here. for almost all of our blends. That's most of what we use. Because we're making potting soil, we're also going to add a little bit of coconut coir, which adds a little bit more structure and texture to the soil. Both of these ingredients will allow a sponginess and an amount of drainage to the soil so that the plants have water without being oversaturated. In this blend, we also use vermiculite, which has a tremendously high amount of surface area. It doesn't provide any mineral content, but it's very spongy. It's super great at holding on to moisture and minerals and providing a home to microorganisms. Lastly, and we're going to be very careful with this product because we don't want to inhale it, we have perlite, and perlite reduces the density of the soil so it's not so heavy and compacted. It also allows for drainage and some amount of water absorption. Now that we've added each of those ingredients, we're going to add some of our vermicompost, and we can use different particle sizes. We use the really fine one and the medium size so that there's a slow overtime release. And this makes our soil living. In addition to that, we will add in some minerals and hydrate it, and that way the UVU grounds people have access to it, and it prevents replacing, the same plants repeatedly. It prevents disease and makes it so we don't use as much water. This is our compost tea system, and we call it tea because we use these small pore size tea bags. And what we're going to do is start off by adding in a blend of minerals, some oats in the form of these carbohydrates. They provide a slow release source of energy for the bacteria and fungi in the blend. Then we're going to add just 1 cup of our worm castings, so about a handful, and we're going to dip it in the water and add in some molasses so that it has a fast energy source. And the reason that we combine the sugars with the carbohydrates is so that we can have a lot of population growth, and then once they finish all the sugar, which they eat first, then they have carbohydrates to continue growing their populations. And right here behind me is what we call pH up and down, and this allows you to adjust the acidity of your solution. So if where you live it's alkaline or acidic, you can balance it so that your nutrients are more bioavailable and the system functions a little more properly. So now we're going to add our tea bag and not spill water all over the floor. So we have a water pump pumping water, and this causes a waterfall effect. And what that causes is an effect called aeration. And that means that we're pushing air into the water. And that's really good because Utah water has chlorine, and that will kill our good microbes that we're trying to grow in the system. So if you use a water pump, and then we also use air stones, you can completely dechlorinate the water in under 5 minutes. And normally this process takes 5 days to passively evaporate and dissociate out all of the chlorine. So if you pump in air, the oxygen actually pushes it out. And that oxygen is really good for the microbes that we want to grow, and also the plants that we're applying this to, because plant roots use oxygen. So now that we have our tea nice and percolating, we're going to take our tea bag and just dunk it in here. And we're going to let it brew for 12 to 24 hours. And what's going to happen is for every cubic millimeter, if we have millions of different bacteria and fungi, we're going to then have trillions of different bacteria and fungi. And so this is it's called a septic cell culture technique. And it allows us to take a very small amount. I just added in that 1 handful of compost right here. You can still see it. It's a pretty small amount with some food. And that's going to make enough liquid fertilizer for us to inflate this up to 1,000 gallons of water. And so we have multiple 500-gallon containers. We used to distribute it across campus so we don't have to replace as much sod and replace trees that die every year by fortifying their microbiome and giving them the nutrients that they need to thrive. So these are our worm breeding bins, and they're a little bit different from the compost bins because I just feed them lots of sugary fruit, and the trick is to just bury the fruit and it quickly disappears and turns into what we call black gold, right? But inside of here, we're gonna have, at the bottom especially, a lot of worms and then worm eggs, and I want to get as many worms as possible so that all of my bins are composting as quickly as possible. And that makes everything harvestable much more quickly. Now, I want to point out that most of our materials that we use here were actually donated by UVU Surplus, which is really great. They've been nothing but supportive along with many other departments at UVU. We're incredibly grateful. It's allowed us to get up to a total of 4 million worm population. So we have 40 bins and there's about 100,000 worms apiece. And we have the ability to constantly grow because of these techniques and these technologies.